Hi, Felicity. Welcome to everythingcapetown.com's phenomenal everyday woman. Can you tell us who you are and what you do?
I am Felicity Guest, and first, I'm woman. Second, I am mum to 5 children, and third, I am of the people for the people. Which, I became a full-time activist 4 years ago, so a
Wow.
late bloomer, but yeah, loving my new career.
That's amazing. A lady of many hats. I mean, 5 children, number one, um, and being an activist, and it sounds like a lot. How are you keeping the balance and maintaining, yeah, everything to be running smoothly?
Well, fortunately, my children are all grown up. My youngest is 27. So, and they've all flown the nest. So, often this is when the older women get empty nest syndrome. Although I didn't really have empty nest syndrome because I birthed a new child. And that
Okay.
is my activism because nobody represented those in the sector that I represent until I started doing this. So I birthed a new child, and this
Wow.
is my baby. It's so my area of focus is economic and financial protection and recoveries, particularly for women and children, with a focus on through the maintenance lens, the child support lens.
Oh, wow. Um, Okay, this sounds extremely interesting. Can you please run us through it, if you don't mind?
Sure. So I'm a victim survivor of multiple forms of domestic violence. And 11 years ago, I got separated, and my ex husband divorced me fraudulently while I was trying to serve divorce papers on him.
Oh, wow.
So so it kind of took me into what I refer to as the injustice system, because he used the syndicate to divorce me fraudulently, and for me to get recourse was incredibly frustrating and stressful. Long story short, I I tried to lay criminal charges against him after him provoking me, because during this period he would say, um, so I said, well, what is my maintenance agreement? Because I still had 3 children that were dependents. And he said, well,
Yes.
let's talk about it. And I'm going, but if there's a divorce, there has to be a maintenance agreement. I was actually playing dumb because I'd managed to get a copy of the supporting documents. So I knew there were no children in our divorce, this
Yes.
fraudulent divorce. But I played the game. And he
Yes.
said, talk about it. And I kept being persistent again. But if there's a divorce, there has to be a maintenance agreement. And he said, well, if you're not going to cooperate, then you'll just get what I give you. And that had been like a couple of months. I would have to beg him for money. And then he would go, oh, no, you haven't been a good girl. Like essentially, he'd go, you did this or you did that, or you had this disagreement with the kids, and I'm not going to give you money.
Wow.
So, I started experiencing something that I didn't have a narrative for. But eventually, so I went to go and make criminal charges against him, and I was thrown out of the police station. I mean, this is not a criminal offense. So I'm
Mm.
going, interesting. But anyway, I was so frustrated that I marched off to the High Court in Pretoria, because this is where it happened. And I wanted to see the judge because, as a lay person, I could see the discrepancies. And I was like so angry that the judge had not picked it up and, said, well, what's going on with this? There seem to be some inaccuracies.
Wow.
Um, the judge wasn't available. And they kind of said to me, sorry, we can't help you. And I said,
Oh,
well, that's fine. I'll chain myself to the High Court and I will phone every media house in the country, because what is my recourse? What am I supposed to do?
yes.
Uh, I ended up having coffee with the deputy judge president, and he said to me, this is a common occurrence in his court specifically. And there's at least 5 a week going through his courts. And,
And that
and it's
alone is his court itself, like just alone for him. So you can imagine how
Exactly.
many more it was happening. Wow.
Sure. And I said to him, so why am I the first woman in your office that is so incensed that that I'm the first woman in your office? He says, well, first, and I said to him, why have you not launched an investigation if you're aware of this activity? And he said, we need somebody to lay a criminal charge. I'm going, wow, that's interesting. I've just
Yes.
been to the police station after, and I left there in tears because they, irrespective of the rank and the gender, nobody seemed to really care. And he said, well, they should actually have opened up a case. Long story short, um, I said, why am I the first woman here? And he said, women are scared, women don't have the resources, and they could potentially put the father of their children in jail. And I'm
Mm.
going, well, I will become that voice, because just because we are women and we don't have the same access to financial resources, it does not mean we don't have a right to justice. So he assisted me to open a criminal case, and that was in 2011. I mean, I still have not appeared in court. I mean, I keep pushing that wheel, I keep contacting the NPA. There's always an excuse, but for me, I just keep nudging the wheel because it's kind of what brought me into what I do, just
Yes.
so that circle can close. And I just want to sit in that court and watch his face, not for anything else, but the whole thing was based on a lie. And the impact that it had on myself, my person, my emotional, mental, financial health was devastating. Um, and I just want to, this man that I was married to for 20 years, I actually just want to watch him and understand why he did it, because I still don't really know. I have my own ideas. So that's kind of what brought me into the sector. I eventually got divorced, but I did go public with a fraudulent divorce because, I mean, I was incensed that there's a syndicate and the victims are women,
Yeah.
that don't have access to the resources that I was fortunate to have. And then I, yeah, so I went to the media with the fraudulent divorce, the syndicate. And then he laid criminal charges against me. And within a week, I was called in. They wanted to fingerprint me for defamation of character, for
Wow.
a host of charges. And again, I just became aware he has access to justice that I still was not able to have.
Yes.
Uh, but this was now to punish me because I had gone public with what he had done. So what I've come to understand with domestic violence is it thrives in secrecy. So all the time that this was not in the public domain, it was thriving because he was punishing and rewarding me through money. And this was like quite a drastic step that
Yes.
he that he laid criminal charges, and he was quite happy to have me locked up. And all I did was speak out publicly, was expose the secrecy of his abuse. So, there had to be some kind of retribution for that. And so it is for most abusers, because the moment you expose the abuse, there will always be retribution. But you also then start making progress in stopping that
Yeah.
abuse, because they don't want the public to know, because they have a different persona to the public. So eventually he signed my divorce. We got divorced, and I thought, well, wow, I've got a maintenance agreement now. At least that will stop.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I just into structural and systemic abuse, which compounded my the abuse that I was already experiencing. And I think that for me was probably worse because I felt hopeless. I went to a place where I'm supposed to get justice, where women and children are supposed to be protected, and I was systemically and structurally abused. And I think that started my post-traumatic stress disorder, because when we live in hope, and when you've got no hope, then it has a huge physical and emotional and mental impact on you. So then I eventually got I started a Facebook group because I thought, if I had resources, and I had an attorney and an advocate pro bono, only because they kind of felt sorry for me.
And you were nudging on them the whole time. You didn't stop. I'm
Yeah.
sure.
And one, it was a fraudulent divorce, and my fourth child is a neurodiverse child who's turning 29 this year, but he needs care for the rest of his life. So if I couldn't get access through the maintenance system, what other way did I have, or course did I have to protect my child? Because I was a stay-at-home mom for 20 years. I mean, I couldn't work. My son was incredibly ill. I saved his life many times. And on top of that, I had 4 other children, and I had a husband who traveled a lot. So my career was a full-time mother and wife, to run the household.
Yes.
And I left with nothing. So the only thing that I had, the only source of income that I really had besides a little hobby that I'd started, was child support. And without that, the impact is so multi-level. But everybody kept saying, go to the maintenance court, like it works, and I was in the system. So I eventually got a protection order for economic abuse to protect my son, because I had to now start looking at somewhere to put him so that he can develop and reach his full potential. I wasn't able to offer that to him anymore. And I couldn't do that without financial, regular financial support. So I got a protection order, fortunately, because still to this day, like 9 years later, women able to get a protection order for economic abuse, because one, people don't understand it. It's so normalized that so very few women get it. Anyway, so I got that, and I thought, well, okay, now he's definitely going to pay, because I can have him arrested for violating my protection order. And that, again, I mean, I just went straight into an abusive system. The police station wouldn't open a charge because they said, well, where's he hurt you? We can't see any physical evidence how he's abused you. So no, go to the maintenance court. And I said to her, you can't see any physical scars. These scars are all inside me. How do I show you the harm, the abuse? How do I show you my scars? And I mean, she was completely disinterested. I said to her, you clearly don't know the Domestic Violence Act. And then, I mean, that was like putting a match to petrol, because she said, don't you tell me how to do my job. I've been a captain for X amount of years. Anyway, I mean, I eventually did have him arrested, which is another whole story, but I've never been able to hold him accountable via my protection order. And he's abused the maintenance system completely. He knows how to play it. He knows how to delay it. He knows that so what I noticed was that the system works for the person who, the perpetrator, and they have far more rights than the victim trying to have their rights to safety, and financial safety is a big, it's probably the biggest cog of the domestic violence wheel, because of the dependency and the inequality generally that women experience. That I started a Facebook group called Child Maintenance Difficulties in South Africa to help other women who didn't have the resources that I did. Not that they really helped, but and I started seeing patterns and recognizing trends. Today I've got over 77,000 people on that group. It's 8 years old. 84% of the women, their stories are my story. My story is their story. Parts of my chapters are their chapters. And and so I started speaking out about it and creating awareness and doing research to really understand this, but to also interrupt this, because my mother was a victim of this. I was a victim of this. And I don't want my children, my girl children, and my grandchildren to end up in the same system that I have been stuck in for 11 years. Because, the intersection this is one of the biggest drivers of poverty, and the face of poverty is women and children. Because if women are raising children on their own without financial support, it keeps them stuck on the poverty line, or pushes them towards the poverty line, and keeps them below the poverty line. So this is a critical aspect. This is not just, women wanting men's money,
Yes,
or
it's not about that at all. And
yeah,
they turn it out to be that way, you know, when it's
yeah.
not like that at all. So I just
Mm.
want to highlight and say thank you for pushing that out there and for seeing the gap that was needed. Yeah, like so thank you so much. And especially for us youth, it's going to help us in a big way, whereas the generation before us, like you said, you saw the gap and you started this only recently, if not too many years ago. Um, but it will be so much of a help for us, whoever's going through that, especially with the younger generation. So thank you, Felicity.
You're welcome. It's also it's just the way that we've been socialized. I mean, this is inherent. And in this country, there are many layers to this. And, the most vulnerable and marginalized are women of color. And they also, don't have access to resources. They don't understand their rights. This is a human rights issue. And interesting, it's one of the three non-negotiable human rights in our wonderful constitution is equality, dignity, and children. So you can see the three non-negotiable human rights impact very much in this sector because our dignity is affronted and it's not respected or upheld in the maintenance courts. The
Yeah.
inequality, it perpetuates the inequality, and children are the glue that binds a victim and a perpetrator. And 98% of domestic violence victims experience economic abuse in their relationships. This is what makes victims go back to abusers because of the economic dependence, that women choose violence over poverty. Because once you leave, where do you go if you do not have economic resources to get up to get a home, to educate them, to feed them, to clothe them?
Yes. The
So this
basic necessities, you know? Yeah. The
So it's a
basic
critical sector. So I mean, a lot of my work is creating awareness because it's a socialization that is so normalized that we as women have to see it for what it is, and that our boy children need to be socialized differently. Our girl children need to know what they go. This is inherent. So unless we interrupt it, this is going to be the cycles that they go into, irrespective of your socioeconomics. The
Yeah.
women's experiences are the same, and that our boy children recognize how toxic this is, not just for them, for their relationships with their partners and ex-partners, their relationships with their children, so that we can change the way that we parent, because the nuclear family is not the norm anymore.
Yeah.
Most children are born out of marriage,
Yeah.
and but they still end up in the same system, and we have to interrupt it, deconstruct it, redefine our socialization and our gender roles, and then reconstruct a healthier environment to co-parent, so that children grow up with a greater sense of worth, because suppose the best interest of the child is paramount, but
Yeah.
it's not. It's not in the maintenance court, and we can't reduce it to simple rands and cents on a maintenance agreement. We have to understand the reasons, the context, and very importantly, the impacts. Otherwise, we're not going to change the trajectory of gender-based violence or inequality and poverty.
Wow. I love that. And I think it made me realize or think about, because I'm so recently learning about, if you can help break that conditioned mindset that you brought up with. And it starts also with your household, the parents itself, like how we raise the children you mentioned, like how we educate ourselves and educate the kids as well, so that they are aware if anything should happen. These are there are resources out there for you to access. Or yeah, so I think
Yeah, Absolutely. And I says it's definitely become a lot more mainstream since I started doing this work. I made submissions to the Gender-Based Violence National Strategic Plan, where the use of maintenance as a form of abuse has been included in the broader definition. It's been also included in amendments to the Domestic Violence Act, where you can actually go to the domestic violence court and apply for interim maintenance through the domestic violence court until your maintenance agreement is finalized. So, it's definitely had an impact creating awareness around this. But again, there's so much education because it's unfortunately so normalized. The single mother has been glorified into a superwoman. And within that is, again, the normalization, irrespective of how she does it, she will do it. And the people that come from homes where they were raised by a single mother and they see what their mothers went through, end up perpetuating exactly the same thing on their partners because, we've been glorified that we will do this, but within that we neglect ourselves, the struggles, the systemic and structural abuse that I spoke about, that's not spoken about. And then a lot of them go on and they perpetuate it. So we have to be so mindful of the many intersections so that we can consciously go, hang on, this is that, it's a form of abuse. It's not, it causes harm, not just in immediate, but long term. And that one of the trends that I'm seeing and is that we're going to end up with many women when they reach their latter years being completely dependent on the state for housing, for food, for healthcare, because they're so busy providing for their children that when their children are no longer dependents, there is not enough time for them to start providing for their own age. So the vulnerability is going to just expand onto our elder women in community in this country. And, we don't have a social security system like many of the other countries have. So for women like myself who have nothing, where am I going to go to? Where am I going to live? I'm already 60, so I'm already vulnerable. How do I get the opportunity to make the kind of money that I can go and buy a tiny little place or rent a place for the rest of my life? And when I can't, where am I going to go to if I, God forbid, become incapable of trying to earn an income?
Yeah. With that, Felicity, you have mentioned quite a few, it's bringing me my next question about, because you did mention quite a few challenges already, but compared to when you started this about 8 years ago, to now, what type of challenges are you facing in today? Like in still being advocating for the maintenance and the educational part to it and to help women out there. What?
Okay, so the challenges are really, really huge. One, I've been doing this work for 4 years without an income. I've depend mainly on charity and the goodwill of people to accommodate me and to contribute to my petrol and food. Because it's a new form of advocacy. So to get funding for this has been quite challenging, but also because of the high rate of domestic violence and femicide, that there's an urgency of protecting women's physical bodies. That's more important than this. And with the amount of money invested, they're all investing in femicide shelters, that kind of thing. And they don't know much about this. I'm always having to tell them about this because not many people are aware of this. What's that?
It becomes like an aha moment for people when they hear it, because like, okay, wow, I didn't realize it, but it does make sense. Yeah.
Sure. So that's still an ongoing challenge, but we've recently registered an NPC again, and with the right partners now and a lot more awareness. And also I've learned, because I mean when I first started as I'm a maintenance activist, but understanding, learning the terminology that people can, the sector and the world understands. So now I've changed it to economic protection and recovery. So what does that look like? These are it's terminology that people understand. So it's becoming a bit easier. And then our biggest challenge is, so if you take this normalization into government, one, I don't think there's political will, so that's an ongoing problem, because if there was, they would have prioritized, because there are laws already. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's laws, there's courts, but it's the interpretation, it's the implementation and the enforcement. That is our problem, because the demand has increased on the judiciary, yet the resources have been reduced, they've been diminished. So and it's the bias. They don't understand the context of it, and also they're actually not trained properly. So you go to a maintenance court, you would assume that the people you interact with know the act, but they don't, and that's the problem. Because if you don't know the Maintenance Act, you are going to be coerced, bullied, intimidating to accept what they tell you is your only option. So that's one of the big purposes of my group, is to educate applicants, victims on the act, so that when they go to the court, that they can hold these people accountable. To do their jobs properly. And I mean, we lay people. So the moment you go, excuse me, but you actually have misinterpreted the act, or you're not enforcing it properly, then there's secondary victimization, because again, but don't you tell me how to do my job. Then your file just gets to the bottom of the pile. Then they just keep postponing. So to access justice, so how do you look after your child while they're busy postponing cases?
Oh my goodness, yes, because it can carry on months and months, and it's come back next month, or it's.
Or so if you don't have money, if you're unemployed, then how do you get money to access the courts? And the courts are in the center of town for most of them. Even if you take a place like in CapeTown, like Mitchell's Plain or Khayelitsha, where we, these very big informal settlements and lower incomes, some of the, how do you get to the courts with the price of taxi fares today? So you choose, if you're living on a social grant, you choose taxi fare to get to court, or to feed your child from your social grants that you get. And those are real impacts. There's no reimbursement, but the person that is meant to pay child support, there is provisions in the act to reimburse them for their transport costs. So you can see it's not victim-centered.
Yes.
So so that's the empowerment part, is sharing the knowledge, so that women are empowered to actually have their child's rights enforced, because the person who should be paying child support has far more rights in the Maintenance Act than the person who is applying to have the child's rights protected.
It's like backward thinking, and thank you for breaking the cycle again. Thank you. Felicity, before we end off, is there anything else you'd like to add or offer advice for the moms who don't know about this? Or even like, look, we have to give some dads out there also the due, because I mean, sometimes there is dads that, are pioneering the single fatherhood as well. But I mean, moms are the rocks for the nation. And yeah, maybe some advice before we end off.
Yeah, I often get challenged on that. And my response to that is, my observations are that men are inherently economically privileged. They earn far more than women. More women are unemployed than men. Women who do the same jobs don't get paid the same. So there's no equity. Okay. So if a father gets primary care of his children, often they don't even, ask for child support. They don't access the courts. They don't ask the mother of their children for child support, because for the majority, they can afford to do it on their own, or
Yes.
better the mother does, because of the equity. They just are able to, and they're able to buy homes and raise their children and look after and provide for them. So, I mean, and that's a one thing. The other thing is that, why should we clap or celebrate a father for stepping up and doing what fathers are supposed to do? It's always like, I see it on my group when a dad posts and he goes, I've got primary care, or I give most of my salary. I don't have a maintenance agreement, but I'm paying every month. But particularly the dads who have primary care, and they go, but I do this, I do that. The women immediately come and clap. And we do that because so many men, 70% of our children are growing up without fathers. Okay.
Wow. Wow.
So when you do get a man who is doing what men should normally be doing,
Exactly.
we
Yeah.
don't celebrate the women doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So, it's I'm going, like, it's amazing. Like, thank you for being different to those other dads, not doing what you should be doing. I mean, I'm very mindful with my words, because
Yes.
if we want to interrupt this, we have to see it for what it is. We can't keep celebrating men for what women do, and they're not celebrated, where they're taken for granted, so I'm very mindful of that.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that 65% of mothers are not getting child support. So, this is a crisis. It's not 5% or 10%, and the trajectory is increasing. And if we do not become more aware of this and change it, you can see what is going to happen to gender-based violence victims, as well as poverty, because poverty is the face of women and children. And so I really just want to, if you're in relationship, one, to be incredibly mindful of what economic abuse. That's the other interesting thing, is I speak to so many victims, and they've never had a narrative. They had feelings that what they were experiencing was harmful, but they never had a narrative for it. So it's economic abuse is when you are in relationship and there is a deliberate attempt to prevent you from economic resources or participating. So it would be, you stayed home and look after the children, and then it's, no, you're not allowed to go back to work. Or you both contribute, you both work, and the money goes into one bank account, and the man controls the money, and you have to ask him for an allowance, and you have to account for every cent that you spend. So it's economic abuse is the behavior that limits your access to finances. Financial abuse is how money is used as a tool to cause harm. So it's a withholding of money. And I focus on the post-relationship because children are the glue that binds you to the perpetrator.
The perpetrator, yeah.
Sure. So it's, if you stop nagging me, if you nag me, I'm going to pay late. I've got, go and find a new boyfriend to look after your children. Or, when you're so desperate and you keep messaging and they don't reply, then you contact their family, then they get protection orders for harassment against you. Then and then they block you completely. So now there's no communication. And they use addresses, and they resign from their jobs the moment you do approach the court. And this is where you see the coercive and controlling behavior, because now you're going to be punished, because how dare you take my power away to control the money.
Yeah.
So the pushback is against
It's
that.
one thing after the next, and it's actually really a lot that goes into it. So wow, you're making
it's very complex.
Yes.
And now, because it's kind of been ignored, there's a sense of urgency to educate as many people in many sectors, but also, so I've joined the international community this year. We are launching Economic Abuse Awareness Day later this month.
In September or August?
No, Economic Abuse Awareness Day will be the 26th of November. It was started by an organization in Canada. So we're launching it in South Africa this year. We've joined the other international organizations, and they're a lot further than what we are. And they primarily focus on economic abuse, so the abuse within the relationship, and when they leave, protection, and how to recover from that. But they have a social security system that we don't have. We fall through the gaps in this country, you fall hard. I mean, if you take the UK, for example, I mean, they've got housing that's provided by the government that you can housing.
Access, easy accessible, medical, I'm sure.
Yeah. And the dole, you know, the allowance that you get is sufficient. There's so many people who are on the dole in the UK, they can still afford to go on holiday, you know, to Spain or whatever. Here, you fall through the gaps and you fall hard. And suddenly we have the shelters. You go to a shelter for 3 months. Many go back to the perpetrator after 3 months in a shelter because they don't have an alternative. They haven't acquired the skills, so there's no protection, so there's no recovery. So they relapse back into the whole abusive cycle again, because that's why I say they choose abuse over poverty, because that's the alternative.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of work to do in this country, and I'm very grateful that because I've been consistent over the years, and there's a lot more awareness. It's becoming more mainstream, and hopefully this will increase the progress in terms of acknowledging it as a harmful form of domestic violence. And then also, if you just think about the elder, I mean, our elders are so financially abused. They take the grants, they're vulnerable, they live with people, people steal their money in their bank accounts, they steal them, they get power of attorney, they transfer their assets. That's another whole thing, but I can't really focus too much on that because of the desperate situation of approximately, goodness gracious, like if you take 52% of the population are women, and 65% of mothers are raising children of their own. You can see the numbers. You know, this impacts on millions and millions of women and children. That I have to focus on this. You know, when we really see some kind of protection and recovery, then we can start really focusing on elder abuse. But hopefully, somebody else will step into that and learn more and start advocating for them.
Awesome. And with that, Felicity, should anybody be watching this and wants to get in touch or get involved with the work you're doing, how can they find you?
They can find me on social media, on Facebook, Felicity Guest. They can join my group on Facebook if they're facing similar challenges, child maintenance difficulties in South Africa. Or they can email me at felicity.cmdsa@gmail.com. That's me personally. They can follow me on Facebook and on LinkedIn under Felicity Guest, or Felicity Guest on LinkedIn. Our NPC is called the Institute for Social Development and Justice. So they can follow us on social media. They can check our website out and see the work that we do, and then just follow links if they want to volunteer, because we're still obviously capacitating the organization. You know, if they want to get involved in the future for volunteering or becoming an ambassador or funding or donations.
Importantly.
You know, then they can, absolutely. So it's the Institute of Social Development and Justice. They can contact us via the NPC as well.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Felicity, and we look forward to seeing so much of you. And congratulations with all the work that you've been doing and with what's coming up in November for you guys. It's a big highlight and it's a big moment. So yes, definitely we look forward to seeing many, many more.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it's very well. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.